Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Esoterica. I'm Leah Eichler, and I'm here with Susan Catto. And today we have the great opportunity to reintroduce Bethany Browning. Bethany is a horror writer extraordinaire, and we will be featuring her latest work of horror called Cracker on Esoterica. Welcome, Bethany.
Good morning. Thanks so much for having me again. This is such a treat.
Well, Bethany wrote this spectacular story, right, Sue? And when we both read it, we were like blown away about, well, why don't tell us about the story, and then you can maybe give us a little snippet of it.
Sure. Well, Cracker it's really a story about grief, I think, and how when we're not given we're not kind of modeled appropriate behavior growing up and in family situations, and there's heavy dysfunction, that sometimes our grief can manifest itself in extremely sinister ways. And my main character finds himself in a situation where he thinks he's trying to fix a past wrong, and essentially ends up with an oozing dead body in his basement.
Don't give it away.
Well, that's not the ending, but that's essentially, the pickle at the heart of this story is that he has, grief is just love with nowhere to go anymore. And he has a hard time processing his own grief and makes a decision that I think most of us wouldn't make.
Right.
Yeah, it's a beautiful statement about
it really is. I want to immediately record that and put it on a t-shirt or a mug, because I think that really sums up a lot of the story, a lot of what is at the root of horror. Okay, would you delight us by reading a few paragraphs?
Well, I'm not sure if it will delight.
It'll delight me. It'll delight our readers for sure.
I'll read it for you. So just excuse me while I'm going to be doing it on my screen. So if I look weird, then okay. I'm going to read a little bit from Cracker, which will be in Esoterica this month. Mother died cracking her neck, balled her fist, positioned it under her chin, and pushed sharply to the left. The hyperextension snapped her vertebral artery in two, causing a stroke there was no coming back from. First, the left side of her face slid into a slobbery droop. Next, she was twitching on the kitchen floor until she wasn't anymore. I'm not a big guy, so relocating her body down the stairs to the basement was a chore. Her shoulder popped a few times, the sound of a tendon repositioning itself over bone, the sound I would always associate with feelings of love and protection. Her constant joint popping was the background music to my childhood. Call it anxiety, compulsion, bad habit, whatever the reason, she was uncomfortable in her own body, always trying to get it just right, to find the position that would make her feel straight, release her pain, or put her right again. She was incapable of sitting still. Watching a TV program was accompanied by twisting her hips, pulling her knuckles, opening and closing her jaw like an out-of-water fish in the hopes it would click. She'd push on her kneecaps, snap, press down on her toes, a quick blick sound, and contort her wrists into right angles, crunch pop. She'd even get her kids in on the action. Pull my pinky toe, she'd say if she had her feet up when I walked by. I'd grasp her toe between my thumb and forefinger like a cocktail shrimp, pull until it no longer resisted, and feel the surrender of the joint, hear the burst of nitrogen bubbles in her synovial fluid. I wasn't bothered by her constant adjusting and snapping. I found it soothing. Even as a little kid, I always knew where she was. I'd go silent and listen for the rolling crunch of a jerked shoulder, the deep talk of a pressed ring finger, or the crackle of a stretched ankle. Sometimes she'd let me cuddle with her on the couch, and her joints would rattle as her muscles relaxed and she sank into the comfort of the sofa. The sound was always there. Mother was always there.
Oh, wow. That's really powerful stuff, and cringy already, aside from the original death. I mean, hearing people crack their joints is always irked me.
That surprised me. That
now reliving it through you has been horrific. But let's go back to that original sentence you said, that assessment earlier that was so astute, which was grief is just love misplaced that has nowhere to go, right?
I didn't make that up. Somebody else made that up. Somebody much smarter than me.
No, no,
I'm
no.
sure I read it,
Well, we're running with it. So
on a home goods sign, next to live, laugh, love, something like that. One of those things. It's not mine. I can't take credit for it, but I think it's true. I think it is, when someone dies, you still have all of these feelings for them and know where to place them. So it can come out in very strange ways. And I think a lot of horror is based around grief and sadness and unresolved pain, where we put our anxieties and our fears onto things that go bump in the night or ghosts or monsters, when really, the fear of just living in reality is painful enough. We try to direct ourselves over here to what this monster is, when really it's probably just something that's going on in your own house.
right.
I like the way you layer the immediate plot of the death, but then it's layered with the actual, as Leah said, the kind of creepy horror, what would almost be a horror situation for a lot of people, which is living with someone who is constantly cracking every joint in their body.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, this depicts such an extreme case of someone doing it. What gave you the idea to focus on that?
I'm a bit of a popper myself. So I just was thinking about, what is it like to live with, I'm constantly cracking my knuckles. It's a nervous habit. It's something I do when I'm highly anxious. Mm-hmm. And I just started thinking about what must that be like for the people in my life who have to hear it all the time. I mean, nobody's ever complained, but it's got to be something that people have picked up on and noticed, because it's something that I do frequently. So yeah, I think I was just basing it on my own sort of disgusting habit.
Well, it's interesting because I never thought much about cracking before, but in context of the story, it really gives the mother such a background, because she's constantly uncomfortable in her body, which just says so much about her and how living with her must have been traumatizing for her kids, right?
Right. And that's she's alienated all of them except for
yeah.
the one. Mm-hmm.
So, tell us, about, what makes like a great horror story. This was one really caught us, and it's not like a jump scare type story, and there's no skeletons and ghouls really. I guess maybe skeletons, but there's nothing supernatural in it, and it's just a slow burn, fearful story. So tell us, like, how do other writers do this, and what do you recommend in terms of horror writing?
Well, I think that what I like about horror and what attracted me to it is that it's a wide spectrum,
right,
of stories that you can tell. You've got everything from paranormal horror to body horror to things that go bump in the night to just creepy thoughts from a protagonist. So, we're talking, there's things called cozy horror, which is like, things that have elements of scary and supernatural, but all kinds of, it happens off screen,
right,
all the way to like splatterpunk,
right,
which is extremely violent, gory, heavily detailed, brains everywhere. There are splatter westerns. So I really think what's really attractive about horror is that if you find yourself wanting to write a story that has a twist or has a creepy ending, there's a spot for you somewhere in this genre. It doesn't, people who maybe aren't as familiar with horror maybe think it's all just being chased with chainsaws in the woods, or camp counselors going insane and stabbing you to death. And there is certainly that, and I love all of that too, but there's this wide array of horror stories that you can tell that are maybe more spine tingling as opposed to gross out, or maybe more thought provoking and sad than they are scary. So I think it's a very versatile genre. So.
And has it always been your genre of choice?
No, I actually thought that I'm kind of a funny person, so I thought that I would do more
a funny person.
comedy. And I was when Leah and I met, I was actually really leaning toward commercial women's fiction with kind of a humorous bend, and and that was fun too, and that's fine. And I still have an interest in that. But the first story I ever published was a story called Dirty Penny, which is a horror story. And it's about, essentially the heart of that story is about alienation in a marriage and alcoholism and a very cold night and a changeling baby. So, and that's the first story that ever got picked up. So I think as a writer, to be acknowledged in that genre, to have that be the first piece I ever published, just re-solidified in my mind that that's something I wanted to pursue. We go where we're wanted in some.
Yeah, I do think that is a fantastic way to approach any career, but definitely a writing one. What's working for you? What are people responding to? And then that's the way to go. And hopefully it's the one you love too.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I mean, I think you're clearly wonderful at it. So, I mean, what do you? I mean, writing is a cathartic experience. I mean, do you exercise your own demons with horror writing?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think I do. I mean, especially with Cracker, particularly. That's really a story about imagining what it would be like for somebody to live with someone like me, who's constantly cracking her joints. So yeah, I definitely think so. I've got a story out this month in an anthology called Halloween Horrors, which is called The Arborist, which is about something called the Witch's Tree and some bad stuff that goes on down there for a bunch of teenagers. And the Witch's Tree was something I grew up with in Hartsville, South Carolina. So I took, that story and turned it into a horror and kind of combined a few things with some experiences with bullying and that kind of stuff and worked that out in that story. I've written a few little ghost stories that were just about my own sadness and that just manifested themselves in a little sad girl ghost, and that's being published this month too. In the Halloween, that story is called Passage. It's about a little girl ghost who isn't ready to quite go yet. So there's a woman who lost her own daughter who helps her with that transition. So yeah, I definitely think all of these things are symbolic of, I think every writer does that though. Everything is symbolic of something that's happened to you. And when you get asked things like, oh, is this autobiographical? It's like, my answer to that is like, I'm all my characters in all my stories. I try to put myself in all of their shoes. And I think what makes them feel more realistic is when I imbue my own experiences inside their experience. So yes, definitely. I'm definitely working on some stuff. It's cheaper than therapy, but
totally cheaper than therapy, right?
But there's often rejection at the end. So what does that say? I don't know. Writers are weird. We do weird things.
We really do. I mean, so, the kind of the New Year's for horror writers is coming up soon. It's going to be Halloween. And everyone loves to be a little bit afraid on Halloween, so, I mean, what does that say about us? Like, there's environmental Armageddon, there's war in Ukraine, the list could go on. There's threat of nuclear war. There's, I could keep going on all the terrible things to happen, but we still want to read horror. So how does it how do we escape from horror with horror? How does that work?
I don't know. I think that's the age old question. It's sort of like exposure therapy,
Right.
It's a safe space to explore scary emotions because that there's going to be hopefully some kind of resolution, if not a happy ending. But yeah, I mean, I think with any story, if you can put yourself in the protagonist's shoes, it helps you work out some of your own demons, whether that's a love story or whether that's a horror story or a mystery. Stories are something we've relied on for centuries to help us make sense of our reality. So horror is just another piece of that. And I do think that the kind of the ascendancy of horror since the first lockdowns for COVID is indicative that people are looking for some healthy outlet for some very frightening emotions.
And it's a safe thrill too. I mean, it's you mentioned COVID, you're locked down. Well, it's an exciting experience. You're getting that jolt of adrenaline that was so often missing from our lives during COVID when we weren't actually going out in the world. You feel something.
Yeah.
We are collectively desperate to feel something.
I do miss feeling.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. That's exactly correct. So,
who are some of your favorite horror writers?
Oh, right now I'm reading a book called The Ghost Sequences by A.C. Wise. I'm really enjoying that. Gabino Iglesias just wrote a book called The Devil Takes You Home, which is just astonishing. And I think what's wonderful about horror is that it's easily accessible on the internet. There are hundreds of writers who are publishing horror on online magazines. And so it also lends itself very well to the short story format. So you can kind of get that bite-sized thrill on your commute, or just, for 10 or 15 minutes of reading at night before you go to bed. There's this wide range of people who are publishing 4,000, 5,000 word stories. You don't have to really commit to 100,000 words of horror in a novel. You can just get a quick bite of it by finding someone online. So I think that there's just hundreds of different people out there that I'm reading right now.
As a writer, could you imagine sustaining horror through an entire, 100,000 word novel?
I don't know. I've never tried. I'm working on mystery novels right now, and that's hard enough because that's building the tension. I'm not sure. I haven't tried it. I don't know. Maybe that's next. But the idea for a long form horror, I've got something kind of percolating back in there that may be more of a novella, but I don't know. I think it is hard to sustain, and hats off to people who can do it. I haven't really attempted it yet, so yeah.
Well, you think about someone like Stephen King, who's, I fell in love with horror when I was young because of Stephen King. I don't even consider myself someone that would normally be attracted to horror, but the stories are, just so compelling, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think he can be very literary at times too, which I think really appeals to you.
Maybe that's what appeals to me. But it is, if we're talking long form horror, it's that, there is a suspense, but there's character development on all sides. On the sides of the evil characters and on the sides of the so-called good characters, you really feel like there is a reason that the universe has brought them together, which I think, I think that, again, going back to your original statement, allows us to process what's happening in our world, because there's a reason why, and then we kind of get through to the other side, and that's you want to kind of survive and get through and grow and move on. And it is a good feeling when you're finishing. You're like, okay, well, I made it.
And you're like, at least I don't have a body in my basement or like a ghost in my house or something. You
definitely do think like, well, what would I do in this situation? Would I go down the basement steps? No, I wouldn't go down the basement steps, but you might go down the basement steps. You don't really know. But I think Leah brings up a good point too, in that really good storytelling, really good horror has at its basis, what really good storytelling is that you really do have to connect with and care about your characters. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of people getting chopped up for no reason. And there's no, what is that? You have to really connect. And so I think that's what creates the scare, is because you really are connected to and attached to that character who's going through these things, and you want things to turn out okay, So yeah, the happy ending in horror is kind of something that I've been thinking about, because I wrote a story. I wrote a Christmas horror about a Krampus character who basically just annihilates an entire family. And it was just rejected because the ending was too hopeful. I was like, there's 5 dead bodies here on the floor. And they told me it was too hopeful of an ending. So I don't know.
That's very funny.
Yeah, very funny. So I don't, there's happy ending, people who want happy endings in horror, and people who want, that extra, they don't want anybody to get away. So the 6th dead body maybe would have closed the sale for
that is interesting. Can you have a happy ending to a horror story? I guess if anyone survives a horror story, it's a happy ending, right? Because that's, not everyone dies. So if it's not a tragedy, it's got to be comedy. I don't know.
I would consider the short story that Esoterica is publishing, yours, to have a happy ending.
You know what? Do you think it has a happy ending? You know what? Well, how about this? It'll be published this week, right? Right leading up to Halloween. So anyone can sign in or subscribe to our Substack and read Cracker by Bethany Browning, about a woman who dies cracking her neck and what her son does afterwards with her body, which will no doubt shock you and maybe keep you awake for a few days. But as Susan says, it has a happy ending. So let's know your thoughts. Is it a happy ending? I don't know. You can let us know.
It's a witty ending. And I was thinking in that context that wit and good horror seem very connected to me. Like not humor, but wit, that sort of smart, knowing twist or the wink to the reader, where you're impressed with the cleverness with which the author pulls it all together at the end.
Well, I do think there's room for wit in horror because, some of the situations are just very funny. I mean, it's just, sometimes dead bodies are just funny. They just are.
They found themselves like, I'm not even joking. I have been at, funerals and burials where people start laughing, more than once. And I think it's a very common response to sort of want to, laugh away that discomfort we may have with death and, discover. I have to ask, have you had ghost experiences?
Huh. I have had some ghost experiences. Yes, I have.
All right. I won't bug you to talk about that. I'm always kind of jealous because I have relatives who are ghost sensitive, and I am not ghost sensitive. So I'm always curious. I'm like, who's ghost sensitive and who's not? And if they are, I want to hear their stories. So.
Yeah, I don't know that I'm ghost sensitive as much as it's just the supernatural has always been a part of my upbringing. My entire family has always been into psychic readings and tarot cards and all of these kinds of things. So it's just something that's been a part of my life. And I went to an old haunted college in New England, and there were some things that happened there that were very compelling and funny, also funny. But yeah, I mean, I've definitely had some experiences that I haven't written about. I tend to keep those things kind of quiet because I find that most people just kind of don't believe you. So, if I'm with a like-minded group and we're sharing stories, I'll share some of mine. They haven't been that dramatic, but definitely some ghosty stuff has gone on in my life. Yeah.
Interesting.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, you got to write about that, and then we'll run it.
Okay.
And talk about ghost stories.
Great.
Real life ghost stories. That'll be the next episode.
Yes.
Well, thank you, Bethany, for joining us. And Sue and I look forward to publishing your story. Cracker. Again, anyone can read it on esotericamag.com or subscribe to our Substack, and you will get it right in your inbox. Until next time, thank you, everyone, and have a happy and safe Halloween.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.